Welcome back to Midlife by Human Design. I'm your host, Lori Lisai, and I help midlife women learn how to use your human design so you can stop living your life for other people and start living it for yourself. Today, we're talking about Taylor Swift. I am recently very inspired by her Eras Tour docuseries, and so we're going to dive into Taylor's chart. And I invite you to stick around for an exercise at the end that's going to help you to define your own eras and also use them to be more authentic and to deepen your own alignment. So without further ado, let's dive in. Welcome back to Midlife by Human Design. Today's episode is inspired by my recent dive into the Eras docuseries, and I was inspired to create an episode because, one, you guys seem to love the Wicked episode that I did and looking into the different characters from the lens of human design. And two, I feel like the world is so dark in a lot of ways right now that doing something like this is a great way to remember that there's still so much joy and beauty happening, even when there are also really hard things happening in the world. So, two truths at once. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about the tour and then some aspects of Taylor's design and talk about how her design and the different components of the Eras Tour, how all of that ties into midlife and what we can actually take from it. So first thing I want to do is offer a caveat that I am not a Swiftie, so to speak. Like, I have not been fervently following Taylor for years and years since the beginning of her rise to fame. I haven't been doing that. I've definitely appreciated a lot of her music through the years, but wouldn't necessarily call myself a Swiftie. I think that I'm fast becoming one after watching the docuseries. And look, no human is perfect. And yes, of course, Taylor was behind the creation of this docuseries and telling her own story. So there have to be some blind spots. But listen, as far as billionaires go, she's at the top of the fucking list, right? Like, this woman is amazing. And part of what I really appreciated was how much she led with feminine ideals. And we'll get into that in a little bit. I also think maybe one of the things that she did that won me over immediately was the circle. So if you haven't watched the docuseries, I would definitely recommend going to check it out, whether you're a Taylor fan or not, even just from the standpoint of the production itself and getting a behind the scenes view of that alone is worth the price of admission. But one of the things that she does is she has like a circle before all of her shows with all of the performers who are going on stage with her. And this is something that I always did before a show and something I really loved. Everybody had a chance to speak and say something about the process and whatnot. And obviously on tour, you're doing this. I mean, I think she had like 154 shows, something like that. So they're doing this very regularly. And it looked to me like one person had the opportunity to get the spotlight and share something important to them, a lesson, a message for the rest of the crew. And I just loved seeing that so much. It's such an important part, I think, of theater and performance culture that is really beautiful and instills belonging for everybody there. And then, of course, right before they go on stage, everybody puts their hand in the center of the circle and yells, "Fuck shit up, fuck it up, up, up." And I mean, come on. Like, you know my affinity for the F-bomb. And when I heard that, I was like, Oh my God, this woman is amazing. So anyway, this is a bit of a case study, obviously, in human design. And for Taylor, it's an example of embodiment and definitely evolution. So we're going to get into that. Another of the things that really struck me about the docuseries and the Eras Tour in general was the way that Taylor Swift honored herself, like every different version of herself, without like getting stuck in any one of them. You know, there's definitely a theme throughout all of them. For the most part, most of her songs are love songs. And plus, also, they are a reflection of the different eras that she was in. And I think that there's a lesson here for us in midlife to consider where might we still be holding ourselves back based on old stories or old patterns or beliefs about ourselves that we attached ourselves to and we continue to kind of hold as part of our identity. And how might we use our human design to reframe them, which is what I love to do when I'm working with one-on-one clients. It's like, how can we use your chart as a tool to get back to that authentic self and really work through the deconditioning that has to happen in order for you to feel like you're in alignment, in order to feel like you are expressing your authenticity. So each of Taylor's eras reflected a season of her life, a season of energy, if you will. And part of the impetus for this tour was her re-recording all of her albums, right? And going back through all of that music and revisiting those themes. And I love that she just pulled it all together into this tour where she's not like making excuses. She was fully embracing all of these different eras of her life. And I think that's a really beautiful message and potential encouragement for all of us to be like, even if there was a time in your life when you felt like total shit or was a really hard time in your life, all of those pieces and parts got you to where you are today. They are part of who you are today. And it's not about looking back and feeling like you should have known better or holding on to shame or grief or sorrow or anger or any of those kind of lower expressions of ourselves. But instead, it's about reframing it and understanding that it all amounts to the person that is in the mirror right now. And so I think that the tour and the idea of these arrows is such a great example of how you can decondition, how you can understand what parts of your story were you potentially performing for others or living your life in a way that you thought others expected of you, making choices based on what others wanted from you, and just looking back on it and being like, okay, this is how I'm deconditioning. I'm looking at these phases of my life, these eras of my life, and I can understand now how they weren't in alignment with who I truly am. And then what do I do with that? Here's where I can pivot. Here's where I can do it differently in this second half of life. So let's dive into Taylor's design. So Taylor is a 5/1 splenic projector. So we are going to use her publicly available human design chart. If you Google it, you can find it. If you're watching on YouTube, I'm popping it up on the screen here so you can look at it. And I want to just add a caveat here to say that looking at these different elements of her chart, isn't like, you can't look at somebody's chart and say, oh, they're going to be an extremely successful human being. It's more to understand, like, this is how energy can be expressed when it is trusted, when it's resourced, when it plays out in the high expression. And I think part of what we tend to love about these kinds of episodes is that we can compare our own charts to these people, these personalities who we know so well. And we can say, oh, I have that, or oh, I don't have that. And we can just see the difference. And it helps us to understand more clearly our own designs. And remember that human design gives us the blueprint for our energy, but conditioning, which we all do, we all experience it, we do it to others, and we take it on. That, as well as your environment and your specific situation, all of those things are going to have an impact as to how your blueprint actually is expressed on the daily. So let's talk about Taylor. Taylor is a projector. Remember that projectors are here to show us how it's done. They're here to guide our energy. And one of the things that I thought was interesting and very aligned for her as a projector was that this tour came about through invitations, people asking her, like, hey, you've released, I don't remember, 4 or 5 albums and you haven't been on tour yet. Like, when are you going to go on tour? What are you going to do? You know, how are you going to bring all that music together? And she's like, yeah, I'm going to actually do it all together and I'm going to call it Eras. It's a 3.5-hour show, which for a projector is an insane amount of energy, but she has a defined will center and she has a defined root. So 2 of her motor centers are defined, which gives her more energy than, say, a mental projector would have. The fact that this show has such an insane production level is a great example of, again, that projector energy of just like knowing how something is going to go well. It's like projectors they see what can be better. They see people and humanity at this deeper level that like pierces through. And I mean, you can see that in the way that she performs, and she has like this cheekiness about her performance, but it's very interactive with the audience. And I was just picturing like these arrows coming out of her eyes, looking at the audience. And maybe arrows isn't the right metaphor to use because it's like love bombs, you know? Like she just seems very enamored with her audience as well, which I'll talk about again in just a second. But thinking about her projectorness, and she's got costume changes. I think she said the longest costume change was like 39 seconds. She's got sets the size of a stadium. So I think she said she basically does like 8 miles a show. She filmed it in order to create the movie version and the docuseries and whatnot to reach more people. So she's repurposing. And she's got this incredible business acumen where she is taking back her own authorship, her own voice, right? And taking control of visibility and making sure that it's on her terms, which again is a very projector thing. And back to the idea of all of these production elements, it's that connection to being able to see, like, this is how it's all going to play out. You know, I think about my son watching a game from the sidelines and being able to pick out very easily, like, this is how it's going to go better. That is the beauty of this projector energy working for Taylor. And I think the lesson that we can take, whether you are a projector or not, is, first of all, this is a master lesson in orchestration, no matter what type of energy you have. But I think that one of the lessons we can take here, regardless of your type, is that your wisdom, especially in midlife, can be packaged and framed and paced out in a way because you've had so much lived experience at this point and shared with other people. And if you're a generator, maybe it comes through a different sort of creative venue or venture than it would if you're a projector or a manifestor, et cetera, et cetera. Just because you are one energy type, though, that doesn't limit your creativity. Okay, another thing that Taylor has is the channel 2644, which is the channel that connects the spleen, which is, if you're looking at your chart, on the lower left-hand side of your chart, and it connects it over to the heart center, which is the little triangle in the chart. If you don't have your chart, go to LoriLisai.com and go to Get Your Chart and download it there. So this channel 2644 is the energy of a salesperson. And what's interesting is sometimes this channel can, some people talk about it like the energy of a greasy car salesman kind of thing. But in its high expression, it's also very inspirational, and it is here to transmit truth. These people are truth tellers. And Gate 26 is actually part of her incarnation cross and in her conscious sun. So this Gate 26 energy is such a beautiful energy where she is able to kind of see what sells because it resonates with people. So it's more about the resonance, and obviously the sales and the business acumen is underlying this great byproduct of this ability to see what's going to translate. But first and foremost, that is what comes through, is being able to look at and see this whole show in her mind and know these are the different elements down to the very specific details. Like, I'm going to stomp my foot on the stage and a crack is going to digitally appear. So this show is going to be equally mesmerizing for the people down on the floor as it is the people in the nosebleed seats. So she has this beautiful energy. And I think the lesson here for you, whether you have this channel, these gates or not, is to think about how can your channels and gates help you to use your past experiences as assets, especially as you're creating this next chapter in your life. Okay, moving right along. Taylor is a 5-1 splenic projector. So the 5-1 is very strategic, right? It offers practical solutions. It's also very charismatic energy. Remember, the 5 line has that projection field around it. So oftentimes people are going to see in her what they think they see in her, but it's not necessarily who she is. And she talks in a couple of the episodes about some of her past relationships. And one of the things she says is how challenging it was, I think, to be in partnership when you have this larger than life persona piece of you that's like, there's Taylor Swift, the conglomerate, and then there's Taylor Swift, the human. And one of the things that she reflected on was how Travis is, he lives a big life as well. And so the balance there is a little bit easier. The 5-1 profile is also the energy of that charisma landing because you've done your homework. And it's very obvious through the docuseries that Taylor has been playing music since she could walk. She was playing the piano with her grandmother, sitting on her lap, and you can see that she's been seeking stages all throughout her life. It was very clear too with snippets that she was on different stages from a very young age. So the lesson here is, how can you gift yourself with what the second line of your profile needs in order for the first line to shine? And if you haven't listened to episode 94 about profiles, go back and listen to that to get a little bit more information. The next piece I wanted to talk about, which is probably the piece that I felt I could just see and hear and sense the most in Taylor throughout watching the docuseries and the show, was her defined heart center. And I felt like this was maybe the most obvious thing in the whole docuseries, because she had such determination. I mean, it is mind-blowing what she accomplished in this tour. And there were times when she would say things like, I'm just going to do it, even though I'm feeling this way. Because there was one point when she had caught a cold and she had a cough, and it was just like, I'm just doing it. You know, there was no question. There's just like, I've committed to this. I am going to see it through. And there's also a standard of excellence that is so clear that she set. She sought out the best of the best in every single industry, you know, in terms of the people that are working on the tour. It's like, who are the best people that are setting up the staging, and who are the absolute best dancers, and who is the best choreographer, and who's the best makeup artist, and who, you know, et cetera, et cetera. She had this standard, and there was no compromising. I mean, if you haven't seen the docuseries yet, you got to watch it just for the whole drama around the Reputation costume she had. I won't spoil it for you, but there was a little kerfuffle figuring out like some of the fittings of the Reputation outfit. And so this determination, and also I would say competitiveness, like that came out very clear to me. It was like she just wants to be the best. She expects the best. And from at least the parts that were in the film, she wasn't an asshole about it. She was just like, this is how it's going to be. And if it's not going to be that way, then it's not going to work. So sort of this uncompromising kind of flavor. And another thing that she talked about was there was never a problem with the tour itself throughout the 2+ years that she was on tour. Her personal stuff was the hard part, but her determination to see through the tour was like, I'm going to do this no matter what. She went through 2 breakups during the tour, and she met and fell in love with Travis during the tour. So like a lot happened during this phase of her life. And through it all, I'm going to show up no matter if I'm absolutely heartbroken, no matter if I'm excited about new love, no matter if I feel like shit because I've caught a cold. Like, I am going to show up and be the best I can possibly be. So the lesson here, I think, for us in midlife is, what would change if you trusted the capacity of your heart center? And remember, there are only roughly 30-ish, 33% of people who have a defined heart center. So it's not a lot of people. And I talked about this in the last episode, the defined heart center. But knowing you have the chops to push through versus knowing that your determination, your ability to push through is going to be a more cyclical, a little less consistent, that is super helpful information, especially when you're talking about setting New Year's resolutions or intentions. Okay, let's talk about her undefined throat. And this, I think, one of the biggest lessons here, I'm going to skip right to the lesson and then circle back around, is that when you look at your chart and you see undefined or open energy, a lot of times people think, oh, well, I just don't have that. I guess I must not be able to do that. And they immediately go to this kind of disempowering place. And this is literally one of the most famous women in the entire world and arguably the most successful female artist using her voice to sing, and she has an undefined throat. So it's like, if you're looking at your chart and being like, oh, that's not me, my energy is inconsistent here, just fucking remember Taylor Swift has an undefined throat, okay? And the brilliance of this is exactly what she shows us in the Eras Tour. She experiments with different styles and themes throughout her entire life. Now, I will say her undefined G can feed into this as well, because she's got that chameleon energy. She's able to be different people in different places, in different environments and whatnot. And I think that undefined throat and the undefined G express so beautifully. I mean, look at how many just different flavors of the tour there are. The Reputation era is so different from Evermore, is so different from Red, you know? By the way, look at me. I'm actually like, I know some of these, which is where I'm starting to think I might be becoming a Swiftie. Is Evermore right? Anyway, don't come at me too hard. I told you already that I'm not the expert on Taylor. I'm just looking at this through the lens of human design. So apologies if I'm getting anything wrong. Two more things I want to pick out about her chart. She's got a defined spleen, which I mentioned with the 2644 channel. Remember that the 2644 connects the spleen to the heart ego center. So her spleen, though, and this definition here, it was a very important part looking at how intuitively she works, how she is able to like pull threads from music and mash it up. I mean, obviously, this is part of her experience, right? She's been doing this since she was very, very young. But there's this real embodiment that she has and this trust in her body. So one of her shows, she had Gracie Abrams come. And so she and Gracie were practicing, and there was this point when she said, this is better than anything that we've done before. And our bodies are reacting like this. And I was so blown away by that, because what she meant by their bodies reacting is like they were sweating, and it was like this, they were both calling it out as this expression of what was happening and how they were creating together and how it was synthesizing and coming together. And that awareness just blew my mind. I was like, yes, girl, that is amazing. And I think that if you haven't already hit it by now, that midlife is the time that really invites you into deepening into your intuition. And the lesson here is, where are you maybe still not trusting that in the moment wisdom? Where are you still not trusting your body? And if you have an undefined spleen, then what have you learned about how your intuition works at this point in your life? Because it may not have a consistent voice, but it's still speaking to you. Okay, and then the last thing I wanted to speak about, which I feel like was very clear, and if anything, I feel like she really wanted to very clearly express this to her fans, to her audience, for them to understand this about her. And that is her undefined solar plexus and the deep empathy that she has for others and her approach. And this is where I mentioned earlier in the episode, kind of the feminine I felt like she has this underlying feminine approach to how she does everything, how she ran that tour. There's definitely a masculine approach in terms of how organized and specific and planned out it was, but it's so clear how much empathy she has for everybody, from her dancers that are on stage and the backup singers that are on stage with her every single night, all the way down to the people who are trucking the different set pieces and building the sets and hanging the blow up friendship bracelets on the side of the stadiums, you know? And she expressed this in a number of different ways, both with monetary bonuses and also making space for people, which I thought was such a lovely thing. I also actually wanted to tie in Gate 15 here, because Gate 15 for her is in her conscious moon. And your conscious moon is all about what drives you. And it's tied into emotional drivers because the moon is very cyclical and tied to our emotions. And for her, she has this in the gate of extremes, which the show definitely demonstrates, and the planning that goes into it. But it's also a love of humanity. And that, I think, is clear in how she treats the people that she works with, as well as how she interacts with the audience, which I said I would loop back around to. And, you know, it's so clear that she is in love with the people who love her in a certain way, you know? So I think the lesson here is about feminine embodiment and how can you lean into your feminine values and establish norms around them. You know, she talked about how they don't really think about gender. Like, everybody who was in her performance group was at a standard of excellence that she so fully trusted that it was like, it's not about whether you're male, female, non-binary, blah, blah, blah. It's just, you're going to be in this position doing this thing because of how well you do it. And to me, that's kind of a feminine value. It's like being able to see that there's more flow, right? When I say a feminine value, I'm talking about flow and less rigidity versus masculine kind of energy is a little bit more structured and strategic. So also not saying that one is better than the other. It's just like, how can you start to think about where can you invite in flow to your life and start establishing it as normal versus the exception, which is, of course, how we've been programmed to live our lives. So to recap real quickly, basic midlife lessons I think that can come out of the Eras Tour and Taylor's docuseries are that each era of your life should be honored and appreciated, and you should, this is sort of a shoulding thing, right? Let go of the negative emotions that you may have had around it, especially during that phase, and think about how to integrate the lessons and the positivity. How can you use that era of your life to fully embody your current authenticity? There's also a flavor of not erasing earlier versions. Like, how do I just allow them to be and not question their worthiness, but instead understand that I had to go through those lessons at that time in order to land where I am today. And regardless of how I feel about where I am today, this is my current timeline, and how can I take the lessons from the past to potentially level up, to, you know, to jump timelines onto something that I'd rather be on, or a different way of expressing myself. And I think the other thing that Taylor's Eras Tour shows is her willingness to embrace all of the eras for what they were at the time. She talks about, let's go back to high school, and she sings some of the songs from the Red album, and just accepting it for what it is instead of wanting to go back and fix things or to be more mature at a time when you just didn't have it at that moment. So, as you know, we talk a lot on this podcast about midlife as a time to reinvent yourself, to redefine what the second half of life is going to look like, to integrate and embody your wild woman wisdom. And I think that another of the lessons here that we can pull is that we want to be seen as our authentic self. And sometimes that means that we aren't universally liked. Sometimes it means that people aren't going to appreciate us or like our choices. And as long as we're being true to ourselves, that's okay. It's okay to not be liked. And this is also a time when we stop performing versions of ourselves that aren't true to us and instead embody that authenticity. This is also a time for self-expression and in being able to say things like no without over-explaining it, because you're being true to yourself. It's not being rude. It's just being truthful and clear. And then the last thing I'm going to say is a reminder to trust your authority. So for Taylor, she has a splenic authority. She's a splenic projector, which means that her decisions really need to come from her intuition. And like I said, I feel like I saw that at play throughout the docuseries. And if you need an example of what a splenic projector does when she's making decisions or what it looks like, you can watch and see. In essence, it's super important that you're paying attention to your body. And this actually applies to no matter what your authority is. Embodiment is the key because through human design understanding, the idea is that your body needs to take the lead. It's your tool in this lifetime to understand what is for you and what is not for you. So I have a little exercise for you, 5-line practicality coming in here at the end. If you would like to do it in honor of the Eras Tour, the first thing I invite you to do in your journal, or you could just talk about it, talk it through, whatever works for you, is to name your own eras. Think about what are the different eras in your life and give them a name. Doing so will honor them. The next thing is to look through all of those eras and name patterns that you see. What kind of patterns do you see around your energy? What kind of patterns do you see around growth? What kind of patterns do you see around your authenticity and your capital T truth? And then the last thing is to identify, what is this current era called? What is it asking of you? How can you fully step into it? Okay? So that is what I have for today. I hope you enjoyed this little look into Taylor Swift. And oh my God, if you're a Swiftie, drop a note in the comments. Tell me what I got right. Tell me what I got wrong. And tell me, what is your takeaway? Or send me a message on socials. I would love to hear it. And this is the kind of work that I love to do with one-to-one clients in terms of readings and also long-term coaching. So how do we take your design and unpack it over a period of time based on what's happening in your life? So if you are curious about a reading or getting on my one-to-one list, then sign up for my newsletter, because that is how you can book a reading with me. I'm not going to spam you. I don't send out a ton of emails, but what you'll get in there on the regular is wild woman wisdom. So without further ado, I'm going to wrap this up and send you off to go listen to some Taylor Swift. If you were inspired by hearing all of the different parts of Taylor's chart and feel like you want to dive deeply into your chart and figure out how exactly to live in alignment with it, then I invite you to get on my email list so you can book a reading and or consider one-to-one coaching, because I love working with midlife women to help you turn this next era into your wild woman era. And human design is a beautiful blueprint to be able to do that. So get on my email list. The link is in the show notes. And I am wishing you the strength to let go of what no longer serves you, joy to fill your days, and the clarity to be who you came here to be.